In the laws of physics and aerodynamics, there are certain rules that cannot be broken. One of the most fundamental is simple: to fly, an airplane needs wings. Both of them. If you lose a wing in mid-air, you don't fly, you become a falling brick. But on May 1, 1983, over the scorching sands of the Negev Desert, a pilot named Zivi Nedivi broke that rule. He didn't just break it, he shattered it. He performed a feat so impossible that when he later explained it to the engineers at McDonnell Douglas, they told him he was lying until they saw the photos. The setting was a routine training exercise for the Israeli Air Force. Two F-15 Eagles were pitted against four A-4 Skyhawks in a simulated dogfight. The F-15 is the undisputed king of the skies, a massive twin-engine beast designed for air superiority. The A-4, on the other hand, is a small, agile attack jet. It was a classic David versus Goliath scenario, designed to test the pilot's reflexes. Zivi Nedivi, a young but skilled pilot, was at the controls of the F-15, with his navigator, Yehoar Gal, in the back seat. The exercise began normally. The jets merged, twisting and turning, trying to get a radar lock on each other. But combat training is dangerous business. At high speeds, a small miscalculation in distance can be fatal. During a sharp maneuver, Nedivi's F-15 and one of the Skyhawks crossed paths. They weren't supposed to get that close. Suddenly, a violent jolt shook the F-15. A deafening bang echoed through the cockpit. The aircraft shuddered as if it had hit a concrete wall in the sky. Unbeknownst to Nedivi, the A-4 Skyhawk had collided with the root of his right wing. The Skyhawk disintegrated instantly, erupting into a massive fireball. Luckily, the pilot ejected safely. But for the F-15, the nightmare was just beginning. Inside the cockpit, chaos erupted. The jet immediately entered a violent, uncontrollable downward spiral. The G-forces slammed Nedivi and Gal against their seats. Warning lights flashed like a disco, and the flight computer screamed every alarm it had. The navigator, looking to his right, saw a massive cloud of fuel vapor and fire spewing from the wing area. He couldn't see the wing itself through the smoke, but he knew the damage was catastrophic. His instinct screamed one word: eject. "We need to bail out," Gal shouted over the intercom. He reached for the ejection handle. At that moment, the plane was nose down, spinning toward the desert floor at 400 knots. Ejecting was the only logical option. It was what the manual said. It was what physics demanded. But Zivi Nedivi hesitated. He was the captain. He felt the controls were mushy, unresponsive, but not completely dead. In a split second of pure instinct, he decided not to pull the handle. He slammed the throttle forward, engaging the afterburners on both massive Pratt and Whitney engines. It seemed counterintuitive: why speed up when you were spinning out of control? But Nedivi knew that speed meant airflow, and airflow meant control. The raw power of the F-15 kicked in. The engines roared, spitting blue fire. The burst of speed forced air over the remaining control surfaces, and miraculously, the spin stopped. The nose came up. The plane leveled out. Nedivi gasped for breath. He had regained control. But what he didn't realize, what he couldn't see from his cockpit angle because of the fuel leak obscuring his view, was that he wasn't flying a whole airplane anymore. He was flying a missile with a cockpit. The entire right wing, from the fuselage out, was gone. Sheared off completely. He was flying on a prayer and one wing. Zivi Nedivi was flying, but he was fighting a losing battle against physics. Every time he tried to ease off the throttle to slow down, the F-15 would violently roll to the right, threatening to enter another death spiral. The warning lights were still screaming. The fuel gauge was dropping rapidly as jet fuel pumped out into the open air from the severed fuel lines. Nedivi realized a terrifying truth: speed was the only thing keeping them alive. As long as he kept the afterburners lit and the speed high, the air pressure flowing over the wide, flat fuselage of the F-15 acted like a makeshift wing. "Prepare for landing," Nedivi radioed to the tower at Ramon Air Base, just 10 miles away. The tower controllers cleared the runway immediately, mobilizing emergency fire crews. They knew the F-15 was damaged, but no one on the ground, and certainly not Nedivi in the cockpit, knew how damaged. They thought he had perhaps lost a wingtip or a stabilizer. If they had known half the plane was missing, they would have ordered him to eject immediately. As the runway came into view, Nedivi faced a dilemma. To land a jet, you typically slow down to about 130 knots. But at that speed, this broken bird would stall and crash. Nedivi had to make a decision that went against every instinct of a pilot. He had to land fast. Insanely fast. He lined up with the runway doing nearly 260 knots, roughly 300 miles per hour. That is twice the normal landing speed of an F-15. It was faster than the takeoff speed of most jets. Lowering the hook, Nedivi shouted. He deployed the tail hook, a metal claw designed for emergency landings, to catch a steel cable stretched across the runway. It was their only hope. At 260 knots, the wheel brakes would disintegrate the moment they touched the asphalt. The runway simply wasn't long enough to stop a metal missile moving that fast. The ground rushed up to meet them. The tension in the cockpit was suffocating. Gal, the navigator, braced for impact, his hand still hovering near the ejection handle. The wheels slammed onto the concrete. The tires smoked and screamed under the immense pressure. The F-15 roared down the runway like a runaway train. Then, the jolt. The tail hook caught the arresting cable. The force was brutal. The cable stretched, groaned, and whipped tight, acting like a giant rubber band trying to hold back a stampeding elephant. The F-15 shuddered violently as it decelerated, the G-forces throwing the pilots forward against their harnesses. Dust and smoke billowed behind them. The aircraft skidded, fishtailed, and finally, miraculously, came to a halt just 20 feet from the safety barrier at the end of the runway. Silence fell over the desert. The engines spooled down. The fire trucks raced toward the steaming jet, sirens wailing. Zivi Nedivi exhaled, wiping sweat from his eyes. He was alive. He unbuckled his mask, opened the canopy, and climbed out to inspect the damage. He expected to see a mangled wing, maybe some missing skin. He turned around and froze. He stared. He blinked, thinking the desert heat was playing tricks on his eyes. There was nothing there. No fuel leak. No mangled metal. Just nothing. The entire right wing was gone. Not just a piece, the whole thing, sheared off cleanly at the root, barely 2 feet from the fuselage. Nedivi's knees went weak. He reached out and shook the hand of his navigator, who was staring at the empty space where a wing used to be, his face pale as a ghost. If Nedivi had seen that whilst in the air, he admitted later, he would have ejected instantly. No pilot in their right mind would attempt to land a plane with one wing. It was scientifically impossible. Yet, there it sat, smoking on the runway, a testament to a miracle. When the Israeli Air Force contacted McDonnell Douglas headquarters in St. Louis to report the incident, the response was skeptical, to say the least. They explained that one of their F-15s had landed safely after losing a wing. The American engineers, the people who designed the plane, ran the scenario through their computer simulations. The computer's answer was absolute: catastrophic failure. Loss of aircraft inevitable. They told the Israelis it was impossible. They insisted that the pilot must have been mistaken. Perhaps he had lost a large chunk of the wing, but certainly not the entire wing. Then, the photos arrived. The engineers at McDonnell Douglas stared at the glossy prints in stunned silence. There it was, an F-15D, tail number 957, sitting on the tarmac with a jagged stump where the right wing should have been. The math didn't add up. Aerodynamically, it should have been a smoking crater in the desert. So, how did Zivi Nedivi cheat death? The answer lay in the F-15's unique design genius. Unlike many other fighters, the Eagle has a very wide, flat fuselage. This design feature makes the body of the plane itself act like a giant wing, a concept known as a lifting body. Even without the actual wings, the fuselage generates a significant amount of lift, provided the aircraft is moving fast enough. The computer simulations had failed because they assumed a standard pilot reaction, slowing down to assess damage. If Nedivi had slowed down, the lift generated by the fuselage would have dropped, and the weight of the missing wing would have rolled the jet into the ground. But by hitting the afterburners and maintaining extreme speed, Nedivi turned the fuselage into a rocket. The massive thrust of the engines essentially brute-forced the plane through the air, compensating for the lack of aerodynamic balance. It was a triumph of raw power over gravity. As Nedivi famously said later, a pilot doesn't need wings, he needs a lot of thrust and a good attitude. But the story of F-15 number 957, nicknamed Markia Shakin, Skyblazer, didn't end there. In most air forces, a plane with that level of structural damage would be stripped for parts and scrapped. But the Israelis looked at the frame and decided it was too valuable to throw away. They transported the broken bird to a maintenance facility, attached a brand new wing, repaired the fuel lines, and hammered out the dents. Incredibly, 2 months later, the one-winged Eagle was back in the air. It returned to active service as if nothing had happened. And it wasn't just for show. 2 years later, in 1985, during a conflict, the same aircraft, the one that had crashed in mid-air and survived, engaged and shot down a Syrian MiG-23. Today, that F-15 is a legend. It bears 4 kill marks on its nose, 3 for enemy aircraft shot down in combat, and 1 unique mark for the Skyhawk it collided with, a grim but proud reminder of its survival. The story of the one-winged landing is now taught in flight schools around the world. It stands as the ultimate testament to the durability of the F-15 Eagle, and more importantly, to the human factor in the cockpit. Computers can calculate limits, but only a human pilot can decide when to ignore them.